Joining me at this time is well-known political poster Scott Rasmussen, author of the book Mad as Hell, How the Tea Party Movement is Fundamentally Remaking Our Two-Party System. Scott Rasmussen, welcome back to the show.
Rick, it's good to be with you.
You know, Scott, you gave us some great quotes in our last interview, and I've used them many times on this show since and on the Tea Party speaker circuit.
Well, great.
One of those quotes was you, and the quote I'm about to give you has gotten a round of applause, as you might imagine. One of those quotes was, you told us on the show last time, you can't imagine any instance in which a Republican candidate wins the Republican primary without the support of the Tea Party movement.
Absolutely true, and nothing that has happened since then has changed that view. Don't know who the nominee will be, and the race is far more wide open than anybody wants to acknowledge. But if a candidate is trying to win the Republican nomination and the Tea Party is actively against them, they may as well fold up tent right now.
Which leads me to Newt Gingrich. He has stepped all over himself. Now, I know you don't have a crystal ball. You're telling us what the numbers say. What are you reading into some of the recent missteps by Newt Gingrich?
Well, I think it has less to do with his polling position and more to do with the lack of discipline, lack of message discipline, which has been a challenge for the speaker for a long, long time. And, he's someone who's a very bright man who does tap into some level of discontent that voters have felt over the years. But he also has very high negatives. In my mind, he was never a serious chance to win the nomination, barring an unusual set of circumstances. But with this opening week of his campaign, I think any prospect he had is now gone.
First of all, let me tell you, I appreciate the frankness and the candidness of your comments. Not easy to get someone to come on the show and say that about the former speaker. Interesting comments you made, Scott Rasmussen, because as I have said many, many times on this show, Dick Morris recently, 8 weeks ago, told me in a conversation that Newt Gingrich can mop up the floor in a debate with Barack Obama and run circles around him. But I didn't see, while I'll concede that, I didn't see Gingrich as someone who can really connect in a charismatic way with people.
Right, he's not going to be the nominee. And when we talk about this, when you talk about a debate setting, I think the scary part of a Newt Gingrich is on a good day, if he was on message, he certainly would be an effective debater. But he also has a penchant for saying just the wrong thing at the wrong time and stepping all over his message, which is what happened this week. And so that would have been a risk for anybody. For any campaign manager would be terrified to have a candidate like that entering the debate field. But look, right now there's a group of candidates. You've got Mitt Romney, you've got Tim Pawlenty, you've got Mitch Daniels, who are at some level acceptable to establishment Republicans. You've got other people who are trying to raise their profile and become a challenger. And I expect that between now and Labor Day, somebody, at least one person, is going to emerge as sort of the candidate of the outsiders. I don't know who it will be because it's not about their resume. It's about their ability to connect with people, to walk into that living room in Iowa and convince people not only that you have good ideas, but that you're really worth fighting for. And just to give you a sense of scale on that, a couple of weeks ago when Donald Trump kept talking about the fact that he really was running,
right. I
said, just imagine this experiment. How is he going to play if he walks into a living room in Iowa? It just wasn't going to be a good connection.
Not at all. Not at all. I agree. John Bolton came on the show and broke a news story. He said he's very seriously considering running, and then he went on at great length to defend his image as a single-issue candidate. Any polling numbers giving any indication of the popularity of a John Bolton?
No, and anytime we put a name like that in, there's a couple things I can tell you happen. Number one, in a general election matchup against President Obama, all of the lesser-known candidates trails significantly, but the president ends up somewhere in the mid-40s. That's the way it would be with Ambassador Bolton. And that means really the race is about Barack Obama. Second thing in the Republican primary, they wouldn't do all that well right now because the bigger names are drawing all the attention. But what happens is, a candidate like that who can build an organization and make those, find a way to connect with voters early on, can quickly rise to the top and of one group of candidates. And whoever that, and again, it's who does lightning strike? Who will that candidate be? We just don't know at this time, but they can become very serious very quickly. 4 years ago today, nobody knew who Mike Huckabee was. He did very well in the Iowa State Fair, really connected with people throughout the state, won the Iowa caucus, and he ended up getting more delegates than anybody but John McCain. That scenario, including the possibility of winning the nomination, is open to someone today. And we really have no idea. Again, I would say that this race is so open that a candidate can enter as late as Thanksgiving and still win the nomination.
You talked about that candidate emerging between now and Labor Day as an outsider. The South Carolina debate, our listeners told us by and large they were unimpressed. It was like the B team came to play. Except there appears to be one name that sort of stood out. I'd like to get your thoughts on Herman Cain.
Well, Herman Cain is a great speaker. He is a great story. He has the potential to emerge. He needs to find a way to address a couple of things. Number one, what is it that sparks, your legitimacy as a candidate? What is it that might push you a little bit further? I would think he could do very well in Iowa and emerge as a serious candidate. The question then becomes, can his organization handle the opportunity that is handed them? Because when you become an outsider candidate, you're given a bigger stage, you're given the megaphone, but then you have to deliver. And the other thing that I would say about Mr. Cain in terms of his performance so far, I think on many things he displays good common sense. He has great ways to connect with voters. Seemed very weak on foreign policy matters. And while that is not going to be the primary issue in the campaign, it is something that perhaps he needs to have a little more work done on before he can move to that next tier of candidates.
I'm looking at your website, RasmussenReports.com, right now, and I see something which you referenced a moment ago. Generic Republican, 45%, Obama, 43%. What does that tell us this early in the game, if anything? Well,
it tells us that if the election were held today, it would be a competitive race. There is no such thing as a generic Republican, but the fact that the president is in the mid-40s means he hasn't closed the deal either. And when we poll every individual candidate, we've polled dozens of them, the president gets between 42 and 49% of the vote against everybody. The problem I have with getting too in-depth, too analytical about numbers like this is the time frame. In 1983, a year before Ronald Reagan won 49 states, he and Walter Mondale were very competitive in the polls. Now, what happened, and it was already happening, we know this in retrospect, the economy was just going gangbusters. And so the nation was experiencing incredible growth. And Ronald Reagan was able to say, look, it was my policies that turned around. We had a terrible recession, and now it's morning in America. That was the theme. Barack Obama is not going to be blessed with such an economy. In fact, there's a lot of concern. Some people think it will go into a double-dip recession. Others think it will be a period of modest growth. But the environment a year from today will be a lot different than it is today. If the economy is significantly stronger, President Obama will be hard to defeat. If the economy is significantly weaker, it will be difficult for a Republican to lose.
It's all about the economy come 2012.
Yeah, that is the biggest issue. It's not that people are entirely focused on that, but they're looking at this as a problem, and they are frustrated about the lack of leadership. 65% tell us they don't think anything is going to be done about the federal budget deficits before election 2012. They don't think either party has presented or will present a serious plan to address the the deficit and the related spending problems. There's a lot of frustration out there. And what it boils down to, you can never pick a single number, but the one number that is really important when you look at the way people feel about the economy is their own personal finances. On the day before Lehman Brothers collapsed back in the fall of 2008, 43% said their own finances were in good shape. By the time Barack Obama took office, that had fallen to 35%. Today, more than 2 years later, it has fallen another 6 points down to 29%. Until people start feeling better about their own finances, it's hard for them to look at at a bigger picture.
Is there a candidate in your polling data which jumps out on the Republican side, which Mitt Romney comes to mind, which appears to be the candidate that emboldens confidence on the economic issues in voters?
Not at all. The Republican candidates right now, while they're well known to activists and insiders, they are not making much of an impression on the broader electorate. We tend to, those of us who get involved in this world tend to forget that most Americans have a life outside of politics, and this is their down season. And there is a process. There's a reason we have these rituals that we go through. People will get to know the candidates. They will get to know the Republican. And whoever emerges as the ultimate Republican standard bearer will be pretty close to where the generic Republican vote is on day one. And then they can either improve on that or make it worse, depending on how much of a distraction they are.
That makes sense. You're right. I mean, those of us who are involved in the political dialogue, we tend to forget that Americans there's a whole population out there with a life outside of politics 24/7.
That's right. And they are looking at other things. And when it comes time next year, as they begin to absorb all the options before them, the election will start off as a referendum on the president because that's what, that's the way elections are held for incumbents. The other thing that will happen is after they make their decision on President Obama, they will look at the Republican challenger. If that person is a distraction or very weak, it might cost some support. If that person is really strong, it might waver a little bit. But the starting point will be views of President Obama.
Scott Rasmussen, two quick other items here. One related to what you just said. I'm looking at your website, RasmussenReports.com. 54% blame Bush for the recession, 39% blame Obama on your website. To take your comments from a previous statement, we can probably expect that to shift with time depending on how painful the economy is.
It may shift with time. I think there is a residual belief that the Bush administration, and especially tying in the bailouts, were responsible for the recession. I think as time goes on, the thing that happens, though, is the Obama team gets more of the blame for not getting us out of the recession. Yes, we believe the other guys pushed us into this ditch, but you were brought on the job to get us out type of mindset. And right now, while President Bush still gets most of the blame for that economic disaster, only 34% give the president good or excellent ratings on his economic policies. He's doing much better on national security issues, but not so well on the economy.
Final question. I'm looking at your website. It's off politics, but it's interesting to me because it shows buying habits and reading habits of Americans. Just 27% of Americans today buy a print version of a newspaper on a regular basis.
That's right. And by the way, people over 40 are much more likely to be in that group than people under 40. People tell us they still like the print. They like to pick up the paper and have that physical presence, but as a practical matter, they are looking to the online world. And one of the things that's happened is the perceived gap between the reliability of print newspapers and online news has virtually disappeared. 76% say that print newspapers are at least somewhat reliable. 68% say the same thing about online news sources. Neither one of them is seen as very reliable. And so what that tells us is people are beginning to look for a lot of sources of information and make their own judgment on it.
Very interesting. Scott Rasmussen, we thank you for joining us again, folks. His book is Mad as Hell, How the Tea Party Movement is Fundamentally Remaking the Two-Party System. Any final comments, Scott?
I think it's going to be a fascinating year, and the things to be watching for are those personal economic trends. Housing market's still down. Concerns about jobs are there. Ultimately, those form the backbone of the way people are going to make a decision about the 2012 elections.
All right, very good. Scott Rasmussen.
Thanks, Rick.
You bet. All right, folks, I'm Rick Amato. We're back right after this.